Hi, this is Steve DeWitt. The memories you will hear belong to a group of soldiers back in 1983 stationed at a distant outpost in Namibia during South Africa's border war. We were conscripts called up to the infantry and had to patrol the countryside for enemy guerrillas. SWAPO, as they were known, were fighting for the independence of Namibia. They trained in Angola and infiltrated into Ovambaland, a northern province of Namibia. We in turn were conscripts in the 6th South African Infantry, trained in Grahamstown, members of Alpha Company. In February 1983, we found ourselves stationed at Oshikango, a border post between Namibia and Angola. There we centered ourselves around a prominent landmark called Alpha Tower, from where we patrolled into southern Angola, searching for guerrillas. We had many scrapes in the bush in what was for us an exciting time in our youth. On the 4th of March that year, SWAPO attacked Alpha Tower, a memorable event for all of us. The enemy numbered between 60 and 80, while we had a similar number of soldiers at the tower. This was an unusually large enemy attack, different to the small skirmishes we had experienced in 6 months of patrolling Ovambaland until then. SWAPO's Vulcan Brigade was attacking us, their elite force, sent to target strategic enemy positions as they intensified their fight. They had a logistical coordination that surprised us. Psychologically, it was a dramatic shift as we realized we were up against a more sophisticated enemy than before. Most of us were 19 or 20 years old, and while experienced in anti-guerrilla warfare, this was our largest combat event to date, so it made a marked impression. Also, SWAPO had an evacuation procedure in place which removed most of their dead and wounded during the fight. We only found out much later that we had killed 7 and wounded 9 or 10 enemy. In the mid-2010s, we men of Alpha Company formed a veterans association, the Bush Brothers United. In pooling our memories and photographs, we decided to preserve some of our memories digitally. This video is one of the outcomes. Most of the images are from our personal collections. 1 or 2 supporting pictures have been taken from social media. Our intention is not to inflate what happened at Alpha Tower, just to record our impressions now, nearly 4 decades later, before our memories fade even further.
4th of March 1983 at Oshikango's Alpha Tower was like any other day there. Platoons 3, 4 and 5 of 6 size Alpha Company had during the course of the day arrived back at the tower. One of the platoons was already there, being the platoon that remained behind at the tower generally. And I forget now which of the platoons it was that came in during the course of that afternoon, whether it was platoons 3, 4 or 5 or all 3 of them. But in any event, all 3 of the platoons ended up at Alpha Tower that evening. It wasn't unusual for there to be more than 2 platoons when there was a replenishment of rats or ammo or something like that. It just so happened that we all seemed to converge in the tower on the same afternoon.
Yeah, 4th of March 1983, Platoon 4. We'd been out in our area in the Vlakgebied, and our platoon sergeant, Jonker, was had to go back to the base. He was going on a course, so we'd come in a day earlier than we should have, back to Alpha Tower.
What struck me about Alpha Tower was how unprotected it was. Being the most prominent feature on the landscape, the only high structure, it was like a magnet for attention. But there was no real base there, no bunker walls, just a perimeter fence, and one small sandbag pit together with a mortar pit. The platoon slept unprotected in the bush around the tower when they weren't on patrol. And it worried me that we didn't even bother to dig foxholes when we were there. I think we'd become complacent and probably arrogant. And given that the enemy tried to avoid us, we probably got a bit sloppy, as Omana do. And anyway, we thought we were better soldiers and could handle anything that was thrown at us. Out on patrol, it was a different story. We were always nervous. I mean, this whole area was a hot area where you could bump into the enemy at any time. But once we got back to Alpha Tower, I think we let our guard down. It was rudimentary, but it was home. So we relaxed and cleaned ourselves up, did some washing, and walked around in slip-slops and shorts. There was this false sense of security out there, even though intelligence warned us repeatedly that an attack on the tower was imminent.
So we had Platoon 3 on the southern side, outside the perimeter of the tower, outside the perimeter fence. There was a Shauna to the south, and Platoon 3 was generally in their little bivvies just to the south of the perimeter fence. On the western side, as far as I can remember, was Platoon 4. They were across the road, also in their bivvies and so on. And Platoon 5 was lying on the northeastern corner of the tower perimeter fence.
Ek was in Peloton 4 en die spesifieke dag het ons teruggekom van 'n patrollie af en ons het TB gemaak onder die bome so na die weste kant van die toring.
I remember we got back to Alpha Tower that day, some R&R, I guess. I was lying around about, say, 7 o'clock of the tower, and I walked over to mates of mine I had in one of the other platoons, and they were lying around about 10 o'clock of the tower. We chatted about the normal things that troopies chat about. When I finally got to my position, I got undressed down to my shorts, and I lay on top of my sleeping bag. I remember looking up at the stars, and there were stars, and I thought to myself, it's a good thing I didn't bother going through all the hassle of setting up my bivvy. And again, as I say, I wasn't dug in.
Yeah, I remember having a bit of a braai that evening with some fresh rations. I think we had some meat, couple of beers, and went to bed, went to sleep. We were sleeping in a tent to the sort of the south side in the perimeter where all the balsakke were being kept. And I was on a stretcher on the ground. A couple of other guys, Roger McCarthy, Stan, Bezuidenhout, Rassie, Peter Flick, Dave Dickerson, I think, was in there as well.
Alan had come in a day before, and being a mate of mine was great. And it was to be my birthday the following day, and we had a few beers the night before. I remember going to bed in the tent, and I think I was one of the luckier ones with decent bedding, as I was company 2IC.
Ons was op pad terug te kom na 8 dae patrollie na die basis wat Alpha Toring was, en ons het uitgevind op daai spesifieke aand sou daar geen vuurplan geskiet gewees het nie. So ons het soos gewoonlik wat ons gedoen het op elke patrollie, het ons maar so na as moontlik aan die basis beweeg en gaan lê sodat ons die volgende dag rustig en laat slaap en dan kan rustig opstaan die volgende dag.
I was in Platoon 1 as well, but I had jippered out of patrol that day. So I was in the base, I'd erected my bivvy up against the fence, and I was taking it easy, enjoying some downtime. What could go wrong?
Actually, I was Platoon 3's radio operator, Stan's radio operator actually, and I was probably the youngest kid in Platoon 3 for sure. I was the youngest guy there. That area where we lay was sort of elevated, and probably we were supposed to be on this sort of high ground covering the south, the approach to Alpha Tower from the south.
And as the night progressed, we got merrier and a couple of yarns and whatnot. And I wouldn't say we went to bed too late, but probably somewhere around about 11 o'clock or so, things settled down.
I was asleep when the revving started, and the first thing I felt was the tremendous concussion that you could actually feel through the ground. We looked towards the tower, and it was very impressive to see the traces and the light show, if you want, and hear the explosions. It is also quite scary knowing that your mates were there.
When the first mortar started coming and the firing started from our 101s, we were woken up with one mega fright. Took off down the cup lane, boots, I can remember myself, boots, underpants, wearing rifle, left my sleeping bag there and cantered down the white line, the Witt pad.
We were out on patrol in Angola, and we're on our way back to base, i.e. Alpha Tower, and had gone down about 2 kilometers outside Alpha Tower on the Angolan side of the cut line, which is quite scary because all these oaks had probably walked right past us. Anyway, went down into a TB, and then suddenly all hell broke loose.
My first recollection of the attack was the firing of mortars. And the first couple went off. I remember it was like dunk, and then it was like there was like a pause, and then it was like dunk, 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 dunk. There had to be more than one decent pipe out there. It was almost like you couldn't actually reload a big pipe that quickly.
And they were big mortars, I realized straight away, because I could hear the base plates thudding into the ground. But I immediately started counting, and at 20 seconds, the mortars still hadn't landed.
Well, my recollection of the events at Alpha Tower started just around midnight when something bit me on my finger, and I lit a match to see what it was. And that is when I heard the pop of the first elimination flare opening just to the left of the road, and straight after that the second flare popped directly above the road. I immediately shit myself as I thought maybe some rank on the tower had seen me light a match and was trying to see who it was.
We were out on patrol. I think we'd set up TB for the evening, for the night. Then the fireworks started and we pulled out of TB and moved in single file.
It was the most earth-shattering noises that I'd ever heard in my life. Obviously, there were the 82s that were raining down on us, and rifle grenades.
All hell broke loose just after 1 o'clock in the morning, and I distinctly remember trying to get under my stretcher.
To wake up with a sound around you that you don't really understand and know what is happening. You know, we were sleeping, and all of a sudden you just hear this unbelievable sounds around you.
I remember that night we were out there by in a TB by the sauna, and we were showing this fireworks display. And then I remember we stayed down in a single file, must have been on the cup lane or something. And I remember at some point in time we did hear some voices in the bushes quite close to where we were, like from, I think it was like 2-3 meters from where we were. And at that point in time, you don't know who's talking there. Is it Swapu or just imagining things or what?
I can't tell you with any sort of level of accuracy how many mortars were fired off before the small arms fire started. At a point after somewhere around 4 or 6 or so mortars getting airborne and not landing yet, the small arms fire started. I just saw this what I remember as this sort of blanket of traces passing over us, and I was lying on my stomach facing the north, looking at where the attack was coming from.
What I do remember is that waking up and recalling it's my birthday and seeing the traces, the green ones and the red ones coming through the tent flaps, and thinking, wow, what an amazing birthday party these guys are set up for it. Only slowly realizing later that it wasn't put on, but was something real. Scampering out of the tent into the bunker, with a couple of other guys in there, and also shouting, skiddy fucking mag.
Toe ek wakker word, toe sit 'n flare wat opgaan en die volgende oomblik het dit net tracers gereën. Ek duik toe agter my balsak in vir 'n bietjie dekking, want dit is omtrent al wat daar was aan daai oop vlakte.
And I can still remember lying in our TB in the sleeping bag and watching the tracers going sky high as these guys were firing on the tower, and then all the radio messages, and that night walking back to go and help or to try and provide help, and all that happened after.
All I can remember is that I had to get away there. Our own guys were going to blow the shit out of us. We even heard other insurgents in the bush, but we didn't make contact with them. I don't know if it was out of fright or basically because we weren't supposed to be there in the first place.
I woke up and saw these sort of lazy tracer patterns in the sky coming towards us from the north. There was also an explosion close by. I then realized it wasn't a fire plan. My first thoughts were, what have I done to deserve this again, twice in like 10 days? Wayne, Brian and myself were lying next to each other, lying in sort of a north to south direction with our heads to the north. I was in my sleeping bag with only my jocks on. My shirt and trousers were hanging in a bush above Wayne's head. I asked him to reach out and grab them, and all he said to me was, "Not a fuck."
But I remember sitting up all of a sudden, startled, and around me there was an assault on my senses. There was smoke and dust, and I could hardly see. In my mouth I could just taste sand. I was spitting out sand, and under me the ground had trembled with the percussion of blasts and explosions, and it was the most unnerving sort of feeling I've ever felt. The noise was deafening.
I then rolled off my stretcher. One of the guys said he's pretty sure that they were going to launch an attack on the perimeter, on the main gate.
Thousands of red and green tracers were cracking over our heads. An awesome display if we weren't being attacked.
From our position, we could see tracer obviously flying over Alpha Tower, but simultaneously over Kufut Base and Charlie Tower. It's never been mentioned, but there were actually 3 attacks simultaneously that evening. Yeah, it was scary stuff. So we clearly hightailed it back as quickly as we could to Alpha Tower.
Then I just saw the tracers flying over us, and I remember seeing red and green tracers, basically set up, and these things were actually flying through the tree. And as they were going through the tree, I realized leaves and little twigs falling down on us, and I thought to myself, but this is serious. This is not a joke.
And I distinctly remember trying to get under my stretcher, and looking up and seeing a tracer coming through the tent. It was it was quite a shock. Roger McCarthy was lying on the floor. It was his birthday, and he was singing "Happy Birthday" to himself. I think one by one we kind of made our way out of the tent, most to the mortar pit. We came through the entrance into Alpha Tower. There wasn't a mortar in it. It was an 81 mortar pit there. Got into that.
Our 2RC lying on the floor with tracers coming through the tent, and he's singing "Happy Birthday" to himself. That's got to be one of the classic moments to come out of this little episode. Another one is, and I forget who was involved, but apparently at some stage a radio call was made to one of the platoons outside the base to send a medic into the base, and his response was, while under heavy fire, "Sorry, I don't do house calls."
I was like, to Peter Hing, I was like, "Peter, wake the fuck up!" And Peter he was lying on his back, and he just whispered back at me, "I'm awake, I'm awake." And I recall Brian was annoyed with me, like why the fuck can't you sleep at night? And then like, what the fuck's going on, And at this point, I hadn't detected anybody from our Alpha Company firing back yet.
Van ons kant af was ons eintlik verlig dat ons agtergekom het dat dit nie ons is wat aangeval is nie, maar dat dit die Alpha toring is Maar ons het ook gedink aan julle ouens op daai stadium want die aanval was nogal vir ons het indrukwekkend gelyk van waar ons was. Op daai stadium was ons meer bekommerd oor ons want ons was bang dat ons dalk in die vuurplan van ons ouens omdat ons nie op die regte plek gewees het nie.
En weet jy, julle die volgende oomblik te val die eerste mortier letterlik 'n paar meter van ons af die aarde skud en toe breek die hel los. Ons almal was in PT shorts, kaalboluiwe en goeders. Ek kan net onthou wat ek gedoen het. Ek het my webbing gegryp, my geweer gegryp en geleopard krol onder my bowie uit. En so het aangegaan en dit is wat ek kan onthou. RPG's, 2 RPG's oor ons koppe, ook maar net 2-3 meter bo ons verby in die boomtoppe aan die ander kant van ons. So ja, dit was nogal skrikwekkend en ek glo almal se ervaring was min of meer dieselfde, tensy daar 'n regte GV is wat uit die heup uit teruggeskiet het, maar ek weet ek het nie.
The first bomb fell on us at the back, right? We knew it fell on us because it created a fucking enormous hole. And for 15, 20, 30 seconds after that, it just rained shit down on us.
The day of the attack, I drew this map. And I'm really glad that I did because it shows quite clearly that the majority of the mortars fell south of the tower in the region where Platoon 3 was in their TB. You know, as I recall it, it was first the mortars launched, then the small arms fire started, then the mortars landed. And I forget how many fire plans they threw off, but probably 2 or 3. And they seemed to pull their pipes up because at some point mortars were now landing within the compound of Alpha Tower.
I had about 3 or 4 magazines with me, and we started returning fire as best we could. My biggest concern at that point in time was I saw that most of the, a couple of the mortars were landed really, really close, a couple of rifle grenades, in fact 1 or 2 within the perimeter. But my biggest concern was for Platoon 3.
I remember Wilcox, our one-liner, he bailed out of where he was sleeping and or something. I didn't know what he was doing at the time, but I just recall seeing him jump up, get out of his sleeping area, run across, and he jumped into the crater where that mortar had fallen. And the second mortar that fell where Wilcox had been sleeping.
And I can tell you, I was struck with fear, that gut-wrenching, hard-to-swallow, borderline panic. But somehow I felt okay. It's hard to explain today. Yes, if a mortar or an RPG landed on me, that would be the end. But I never feared out of that mist of smoke and dust would come an enemy that would slit my throat or bayonet me to death. I never felt that because around me there was a group of men trained and armed and motivated to fight back.
Then came the RPGs, and there were 2 of them, and you can clearly see them on the map. One to the northwest, and one sort of north.
An RPG rocket will self-destruct if it does not hit anything in about 913 meters with a tremendous bang and a red glow, which is what we also did see.
Later some illumination was dropped, and I'm not sure if it was theirs or ours, but my thought was, were they going to charge us now? My idea was that these terrorists just seemed to be more determined and pariah than ever before.
But everybody was as flat as they could, and for some one or other reason, Harold and myself decided to sit up, and many of these freaking bullets were just raining and raining and raining. And then I said to Harold, but maybe these guys are going to attack us from behind as well, so I think I should just shoot in this direction and just nail a couple of mag rounds in there.
Thousands of red and green traces were cracking over our heads. An awesome display if we weren't being attacked.
En ek het so 'n bietjie gekyk van waar die meeste rondes vanaf gekom het en toe sien ek daar's 'n backblast van 'n RPG-7 en ek vat my mag en ek skiet so 'n paar sarsies in daai rigting. En die volgende oomblik toe word ek gestop want ek gaan ons posisie weggee met my tracers.
I was in a similar predicament to Wayne and Platoon 3. They were just behind me on the other side of the fence. And we both had men in front of us, or to the northwest, a platoon in front of us, Platoon 4. So for the whole of the revving of Alpha Tower, I didn't pull off a shot. I didn't want to risk it. And
I recall Peter Hing saying, they're shooting over our fucking heads. Just shoot back, shoot high. We're not going to hurt anyone. Just scare the fuck out of them. And that's what we did. We started shooting back. And we were shooting like at the frickin' stars.
I had no comms with Platoon 3. If I didn't go out down to Platoon 3 or someone from Platoon 3 came up, as with Platoons 4 and 5 where they were set up.
I lay there sort of watching the show, my senses very heightened, and watching the RPGs come over and miss the tower and self-explode spectacularly in the dark night sky.
Yeah, hell of a noise. One of the mortars, when I was still in the tent, landed very close to us. Distinct memory of the grit and the sand in my mouth from the concussion.
And landing in quick succession, like dwah, dwah, sort of all around and mostly to the south of me and then sort of in front of me. And I was, sort of resigned to this is the end.
Na omtrent, ek weet nie, ek dink so 15 minute, toe is daai plek onder die stof. Jy kon behoorlik nie die onderkant van die toring gesien het nie. En al wat ek kan dink, dis 'n week voor my 21st. Fok, het gaan ek nie my 21st sien nie.
The traces, I remember green traces, as well as red traces, of course, but they almost seemed to be floating.
And the traces were low, it felt like they were about a meter above me. And I had this sort of surreal moment where I wanted to reach up and touch them.
And the next thing, Harold said to me, I'm hit. I said, what do you mean hit? And then he said, no, just look here on the left side of my head. And just behind his eye, a trickle of blood came out. And then I realized, flip it, I mean, these guys are out here to kill us. And then things became very serious.
And just having at some point the hairs on my back stand up as if I felt there was something around me, and I could swear there was something lurking in the bushes as we were walking, but of course no proof of that, and we carried on.
Platoon 4 in the meantime on the eastern side, on the western side at least, had also come under fire. From a clearly well-organized group of plan guys. We had no A53 comms or anything like that. And so was Platoon 5, in fact, in the northeastern corner of the tower, also taking quite a bit of fire.
Weyer at one stage shouted for Pete to get the pipe to lob mortars over the tower, but soon decided to be a bad idea in case the guys in the tower thought we were being attacked from the rear. All this time we could hear the other towers and the Kofoot base being attacked.
The firework display from where we were was incredible, seeing those traces fly, hearing the sound of the mortars landing, the RPGs being fired. It was really an awesome sight.
The other two platoons were on the side, so we couldn't shoot in the direction of these attackers. It was a crazy experience in that you're being nailed and attacked and you've got the means and you cannot do anything.
By this point now the firefight had intensified. The boys up on the northern side of the Alpha Tower, we were returning some good fire, lots of mortars and stuff. There was nothing coming from the top of the tower. Stan Harlan, the HQ radio operator, he'd been stationed up there, and he didn't know shit from Sharky about firing a bloody a mag and whatever. And he had a couple of mag boys up there with him, and I think they couldn't get their fucking gun together.
Captain Gerry Janssen van Rensburg managed to get the 81s going. In the meantime, what really concerned myself and Peter was that our mag gunners at the top of the tower, those guns were completely and utterly silent. There was absolutely nothing going on there. So Peter took it on himself to run up that tower. I'm not too sure if he was in the tower, on top of the tower, when the first RPG hit the tower, but that made a hell of an impression on me, because it's not often that you that close when RPG 7 detonates.
And it was Peter Fick who went up eventually on his own, quite an aerobic guy, and I don't know if he's ever been recognized for that bravery, going up to the top of the tower, and once on top there, realizing the mag belt had been put in the wrong way. And if I recall correctly, he changed that mag belt around, and also used an R4 on automatic to try and keep the people away. So that was my recollection, mostly is of the heroism of Peter Fick, who went out amongst that.
It took extraordinary bravery to go up that tower under those circumstances. In later years, when those firemen went up the World Trade Center, it reminded me of Alpha Tower. I was worried that the RPGs were going to hit the stem of the tower and the thing would come toppling over.
The firefight lasted a fucking lifetime. Don't let anyone tell you any different. It lasted a fucking lifetime. But in that lifetime, it was the moment when our guys started getting their shit together, and it was very clear who had the upper hand, was easily discernible. Actually, I even as a kid, as the youngest kid on the fucking block, I realized at a point that actually, we got a bloody big surprise, but somehow our guys close to the fence got their ducks in a row, and things were happening, and it was in our favor.
The shift in the attack definitely came when our mortarists started to launch from their pipes, and I could see the explosions just ahead of me, and it was such a relief to see that. And of course they had they'd worked out the sites already to the various buildings up ahead at the border post and the prison to the left, and so those mortars just immediately started hitting accurately from where many of the enemy were, and straight away the velocity of the enemy fire and the intensity and the momentum of the whole thing just started to die down.
The enemy fire, it started slowing down, started bearing off, there weren't as many bombs coming in. That sheet of tracers that was passing over us turned from a sheet to a drizzle. The 81s combined with a mag, and then the fire that was being delivered by Platoon 4 and 5 started to suppress the fire of the plan blokes. And suddenly, once again, the mag stopped working. I needn't have worried, it was only Peter changing the barrel.
So ons het maar vinnig na die Jattie toe beweeg waar ons gewag het op instruksies. Op daai stadium het ek nog langs Pierre Jonker gesit en ek het op 'n stadium vir hom gesê, maar ek hoor die beweging in die bosse en hier langs ons. En toe het ons later nader aan die basis beweeg en op daai stadium het een van die ouens nog 'n hoetjie van die vyand opgetel op pad na die Alpha toring.
They were not doing a better job than us. We did a much better job than them. We were a bunch of kids, and all of us national servicemen, conscripts, brought in there to just to do your civil duty, and we kicked their asses.
At about 3:30, our platoon left on a follow-up. I did not accompany them as I'd been ill for a few days and stayed back. I then later realized that maybe this wasn't such a good idea. I should have moved over to the tower, because here I was alone There might have been some terrorists around, maybe lost or separated. Also, if I now move to the tower, would not some trigger-happy troop not maybe fire at me as I walk towards the tower? I lay there wishing my heart wouldn't beat so loud. I folded the butt of my rifle up as it already had a round in the chamber, and I put it on automatic, and I just lay there and kept it ready. Later, I dozed off as the sun came up and awoke later when John, that was John N. Boyson, called out to me.
Sergeant Major moves. Leopard crawled over to me in his underpants, bleeding his legs and arms, and asked how I was, and said, if anyone comes through that gate, you shoot them. And then he went off to check on other guys, and I felt this huge sense of responsibility as the protector of the gate.
I remember seeing Sergeant Major moves with his underpants and scrapes all over the place. I think what made him take cover was an RPG exploded in the tree just above their tent, if I remember correctly.
It was quite impressive, though, the amount of fire that was delivered on that tower by plane. I don't know why they decided to direct most of the fire directly at the tower. They obviously knew where we were. If they had any sense, they would have probably managed to come around the rear of the platoons and surprise them, but it seemed like, as far as they were concerned, an assault on the perimeter was what they wanted to do.
Well, eventually it started to peter out, and after a while it became clear that they had withdrawn. And it was with a lot of relief that I realized that no one within Alpha Tower had been killed. There had been a previous attack on the tower 2 years before, where 2 guys fell off the tower. And so I lay there, all vigilant as the self-righteous keeper of the gate, and filled with adrenaline and my thoughts racing. And I thought back to a few days before when 2 local villagers had come into the camp with a python skin, tried to sell it to us for 50 rand. And I wondered if they hadn't been informed.
We actually came in the previous day, and that day that we came in, that afternoon, late afternoon, there were 2 Ovambos walking around there, and they had dark sunglasses on, and they were pointing out and basically talking and standing in between us. And I thought to myself, this is actually crazy.
As it turns out, we tried all night to run around and locate the enemy, because we knew the attack was happening, and one way or another, as hard as we tried, we were not able to engage with them, which was disappointing, since it would have been ideal had we been able to set an ambush for them or counter-attack them, either during the firefight or once they started retreating.
We got to the tower, which was quite late, probably about 3:30, and by then everything had settled, and we went into our normal position where Platoon 1 was when we were at the tower, which was in the northeast corner of the compound, just outside the Weyer.
It was a long night running around in the bush, and the adrenaline was pumping healthily.
At first light, my platoon came walking into Alpha Tower, and my good mate Dave Lee came over, and he said, "How come the shit always happens around you? I thought you died, man." And not really knowing where I was going with this one, I said to him, "Yeah, we did die, but heaven's a cuck place, so we came back." And he said, "Why is heaven a cuck place?" And Fani van Wyk, who had also been at the tower that night, sitting next to me, he chirped, "The dead gooks are all alive. You keep saying sorry the whole time."
Next morning, when it was getting light, went back to where our kit was, and lo and behold, my sleeping bag was full of fucking holes, blown to shit.
But I remember walking through the outbuildings the following day when we moved in, seeing all the blood spatters against the walls and the carnage, and it was really mind-boggling for me that no bodies were strewn.
The next day was full of activity. We scoured the area looking for casualties, found masses of shells, the enemy placements, discarded clothing, you know, the general stuff that litters the battlefield. We did house searches through Santa Clara, And that was scary, jumping through doors and windows, not knowing if some wounded Swapo inside was going to make a last stand.
The next day, the follow-up, all the blood in the filling station, the tracks leading up the road. I remember finding a bag of PE4 that had been dropped by one of them. You could see where one of our 81s had exploded in front of him, knocked him flat, a bit of blood lying around there, left the bag of PE4 behind. I picked up a Cuban cap, which I kept until some years ago when it was stolen during a burglary.
Die volgende oggend het ons so 'n vee-operasie gehad en ons kom af op by Alpha Toren Casualty waar het hom so hele walsand om hom geskop het. Hy het so pragtige baie net op sy heup gehad wat ek afgesny het en voor hom hemp ingegooi het. En dit is een van my most prized possessions ooit.
They were well organized. Had a medical station inside the petrol garage at Santa Clara. The place was covered in blood and there were many blood trails leading up the Onjiva road and then dispersing into the bush. I realized they were more competent than we thought and had an infrastructure in the bush to support them logistically with ammo and to evacuate casualties.
Ons het so 'n bietjie rondgekyk daar en ons het gesien waar daar van ons mortiere geland het. En jy kon duidelik sien die mortier het geland, die ontploffing het afgegaan naby ouens, het bloed gelê. Hulle het die ouens gesleep in die rigting van hy Fina garage in die dorp. En ja, daar sou dit net weggeraak.
Kazovac chopper arrived, then the Kufut, later the Beredo horse guys. The place was buzzing with activity.
Anyway, the next morning I recall us heading back to Alpha Tower to regroup with all the other platoons. As it turned out, given that they were at the tower during the attack, they no doubt had it. It was probably a heck of a lot more frightening for them than what it was for us. In the bush trying to locate the enemy.
When we walked in, it was eerie. There was this smell of cordite, dust, and very quiet and very calm.
Next day, the platoon went back out on a follow-up. I stayed behind and spent most of the day up on the tower listening to the follow-up. And remember seeing the gunships. I think it was Platoon 4 that hit a contact quite close to us.
We were obviously immediately ordered straight back out on our follow-ups. We moved back down the cut line where we thought they had run, picking up various items of equipment on the way. So clearly they had run that way, and we're just dropping equipment, water bottles, caps, etc. on their way. At first light we went down very briefly, and suddenly all hell broke loose again about 2.5 k's down the cut line, where we picked up a couple of the oaks. We called in a chopper. I'll never forget Moves' comment to me on the radio. It was, kry die fokkers, bossie, kry hulle. Anyway, a chopper came in and then a stick of kufut came. We couldn't follow on foot. The whole thing was way too quick, but they got away.
Our OC called the platoons in there into the Alpha Tower perimeter and started dishing out orders of where we were going to head off to and how we were going to follow up on the operation.
The next day, I also remember us warning nobody to use the road, but the Kufut, in their wisdom, decided to race down and hit a landmine, which was quite sad.
Platoon 1 was sent to search east. It was a long day, considering we'd been awake all night the night before and the previous day. We caught up with the Beredo horse guys. They'd walked into a pomzet, wounding a rider, and the horse had to be shot. A lot of enemy spoor headed into St. Mary's mission station. So we followed that, eventually got there, searched the church where I saw the famous statue of Black Jesus. Then we searched the school. It was an unpleasant business. searching a classroom full of school kids, scared kids. I thought Swapo might be hiding under the desks, when suddenly Dave, Lee and I spotted one through the window with his AK, jumping the fence and fleeing into the bush. It all happened so quickly, and I was faced with this decision, but I withheld my fire through the closed window because I didn't want to traumatize the kids any more than we had just by entering their classroom. So the Swapo got away.
In a couple of days after that, we moved back past that ground dam where we found discarded plastic packets, ripped open packets that had contained bandages. There were some bloodied bandages lying around, and also I found a Cuban sugar bag that had blood on it.
Jy weet daar in die geboue, al die bloed wat ons gekry het. En self toe ons, wat Pierre ook gesê, toe ons op patrollie gegaan het ons die verbande gekry wat vol bloed was.
I too have a sample, a tear bag, which I still use at the moment as a tool bag in the back of my car, with all FAPLA and all sorts of other things written all over it.
The one thing I remember, I think it was probably a day or two later, when the Dominee came to visit us from Ondangwa, and he came up with the engineers who collected all the dovets and the unexploded ordnance that was lying around, rifle grenades, mortars and so on. And the Dominee was giving us a sermon and was about to finish when the engineers deemed it appropriate to detonate all this ordnance which they had stacked behind a building not far from us. Well, the resulting explosion was enormous, and it certainly cleared the area rapidly. Men disappeared with alacrity, leaving Rassi tackling the Dominee into the mortar pit, using language that was inappropriate for the occasion, the Dominee thought. But credit to him, he didn't say much. He when he dusted himself off and stood up, I think his retort was, "Ja, het lyk of julle manne 'n bietjie jumpy is." Well, he finished the sermon in Afrikaans. Besides starting the final prayer in English, he didn't manage to get back to that.
Well, to wrap it all up, I suppose when you've lived 5 or 6 decades and you look back on your life, there are probably only a handful of things that really stand out as having made a deep impression on you. And I think that this fight at Alpha Tower was one of those for all of us who were there. That's probably why the guys' memories of it are so clear. Mostly I was relieved that we got off lightly, and I thought this will be a story to tell my grandchildren one day, although I won't be able to impress on them just how dangerous it was, especially with those large mortar bombs falling on us, and how my fellow soldiers turned the odds with remarkable bravery on many fronts on an enemy that had caught us by surprise.
After you guys cleared out, I was at an in-briefing in Ondangwa, where we were informed that Swapo casualties after the attack on Alpha Tower were 7 killed and 9 wounded. This came from an intercepted message that was it took them some time to work out where it came from and what the actual the story was. After that, back at Sixai, we were called to an order group with the OC, then Colonel Fred Ulsich, where we were informed that Alpha Company had won the 5-3 Battalion Ivory Trophy for that particular trip that we were on. At that stage, it was only Roger McCarthy and myself that were left. I think everybody else had cleared out then.
So, I guess in summary, if Alpha Tower was my nightmare, then my brothers in arms were my angels, and in naught would I fear. Alpha Tower was an event that I will never forget. It will always be an event that bonds me to a group of individuals, a group of brothers that no other person would or could ever understand. Alpha Tower and the men that I serve with will always be part of my life.
And then one of the other things I can remember very clearly is the great camaraderie that we had as a platoon and as a company at that stage around Alpha Tower, getting to know each other extremely well under reasonably difficult circumstances.
But a birthday present, a date I'll never forget because of that, and the heroism of so many of our guys.